Welcome to the Women Inspired podcast, brought to you by Modern Well, a beautiful woman-centered collaborative workspace in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm your host, April Seifert, psychologist, entrepreneur, and self-proclaimed life experience junkie. Each week, I will introduce you to a different woman who is succeeding and inspiring others in one way or another. We'll dive into her story, her successes, failures, and the lessons she has learned along the way, all with the goal of inspiring you to listen to that inner voice who keeps reminding you that there is something you want to take action on. You are so much more capable and powerful than you give yourself credit for. Inside of you is a woman on fire. Let's let her out and see what happens. Here we go. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Women Inspired podcast. My name is April Seifert, and I am your host. Before we get into today's episode, this is one of those episodes where I want to give some forewarning before we launch into what is an extremely powerful but fairly emotional episode. Today, we are going to be talking about the topic of suicide. And I want to make sure that I give a heads up about that topic because we will be speaking about it pretty openly. And if for whatever reason, whether it might be that there are kids around in your home, in your car, and this isn't something that you want them to hear, or whether this is a topic that is difficult for you for whatever reason for you to hear, I want to let you know that that is what we're going to be talking about. Now, I'm going to caveat that. Today's guest is a woman named Mettie Spiess, and she is one of the most compassionate, incredible people that I have ever met. And if there is ever an interview about this difficult topic that you might want to consider listening to, this is it. I understand that this topic is very difficult for people to hear about at times, but again, if there's one time that you're going to hear it and that you'll get value out of it, this is one of those times. So although I'll give you this fair warning, I would encourage you to hang with me if you possibly can.
I will never forget having this moment of looking in my bathroom mirror and truly not recognizing the person staring back at me. And I looked at my husband and I said, I don't understand how this became my life. What I say and truly believe is that if your heart is beating, you are alive for a reason. And it's hard and life is messy and we lose people we love and we get illnesses. But if your heart is beating, hang in there, even if it's with white knuckles. Hang in there because your voice matters, your life matters, and you're put here for a reason. You just need to hang on long enough until you find out what that reason is.
Friends, that was Mettie Spiess, and you can absolutely feel the passion that she has for this topic. And that passion comes from personal experience in losing two brothers to suicide. She lost her first brother named Ronnie when she was 10 years old, and her second brother, she lost him to suicide in 2014. Mettie is such an incredible example of somebody who has taken an unbearably difficult situation and turned it into something incredible. Mettie is the 2016 National Alliance on Mental Illness Education Advancement Award winner. She's an international keynote speaker, and she is the founder of A World Without Suicide. She's known as a champion of change and a voice of hope for diverse audiences, including school districts, universities, military, and health advocacy organizations. And to this date, she has trained over 45,000 students, educators, and leaders in her signature programs and support curriculum. I'm so excited for you all to meet Mettie Spiess. Mettie, I am so excited that you're joining us for this episode of the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, April. I'm excited as well.
I have been really looking forward to our conversation because I know how powerful the work that you're doing is, and I'm so excited to get it out there in the world. But before we jump into that, can I have you tell my audience just a little bit about yourself so we can get to know you?
Sure. I am a Midwestern girl. at heart and where I currently live. I love all things dairy, but I am extremely lactose intolerant. So there's quite the fine line and balance there. I have a very kind and supportive husband named Nathan, and I am blessed to work around the world with amazing organizations and government institutions on the shared mission of crushing mental health stigma and preventing suicide.
That is such important work. And for those listening, just from that tiny intro, I'm sure you can understand why I am so excited to talk to Mettie today, because it's such an important topic. Can you tell us a little bit? I mean, I know quite a bit about you because I've done, you and I have had a chance to talk, and I've had a chance to look at your work online. But for those who haven't, can you talk to us a little bit about what got you interested in doing this work in the first place?
Sure. So, unbeknownst to me, my starting of the organization, A World Without Suicide, started many, many years ago, and it happened organically through some pretty significant life events. I lost a brother named Ronnie to suicide when I was 10. And he was just incredible. He was my oldest brother. I really looked up to him. I followed him around like a puppy dog. He was just everything in my eyes. And so losing him was just such a significant and devastating loss at such a young age. And, it really shaped me growing up. And fast forward several years later, I'm in my career. I'm doing very well. I'm married to Nathan, and I have another brother named Ed. And if you ask anybody, he is one of the most amazing people you could ever meet. Just the light of every room, life of the party. And I got a call on St. Patrick's Day in 2014. With his wife calling me in hysterics, telling me that Ed had ended his life.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, yes, that was what I said. And, the losses happened 20 years apart, and it was such a shocking blow of having to start completely over and even wrapping my head around the thought that this could happen twice to two people that I loved more than anything. And I realized that if I didn't have the skills and knowledge to recognize when my loved ones were in crisis and to know how to support them, then other brothers, sisters, families, teachers, bosses, etc., they didn't have those skills either. And to me, that was unacceptable. And that's when I started A World Without Suicide. And I've been speaking and training individuals with my education background as well. So coupling the mission and the passion with my corporate background. And it's been growing ever since.
Thank you so much for being open, first of all, and sharing your story with us, because so many people, everyone has experienced really difficult personal and family events, but not everyone can go out and speak about them as openly as you are. So I know how much bravery and authenticity and just openness it takes to talk about something that is so painful that's happened to you and your family. So I really, really appreciate that, you're being so open about your story, because I know it will help people who are listening to this. As I think about, the two experiences you shared, that age difference is so different when something happens when you're a child versus when something happens when you're an adult. Did you feel like, this is a little bit of a strange question, but did you feel like you reacted to those situations differently when you were 10 years old versus as an adult?
That's a great question. And it is such a unique experience. And it has been a blessing now, because I experienced that loss, and I did experience it differently. And I saw it through the eyes of being an adolescent. And now, fully grown, an adult mind trying to process it. And in some ways, in the amount of shock and confusion and the just pure, unadulterated, shock to my system, that was the same, regardless of my age. But in the when I lost Eddie, I could, because with going through my own mental health struggles and my own thoughts of hopelessness at times in my life, I could understand his frame of mind much better than I could when I was 10. I was so confused. I just thought, well, this can't be right. He's going to come home tomorrow, right? And it was just so confusing at that point. And much of my work now is working with youth as well as organizations. And it's been a blessing in that I can connect with them at a very deep and understanding level because I can still see it through those eyes.
Yeah, I asked that question because I lost my dad when I was 11 to colon cancer. And what I have noticed, and you kind of echoed that a little bit, is that to some extent, I think it would be easy to look at something like that and say, wow, it's been a lot of years. You must be doing great now. You must be maybe over this, or whatever the terminology you might use. But what's interesting is, like you said, you experience that event as an adolescent, as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old, whatever. And there's almost a reprocessing of it as you get older and you hit a certain point where it's like, now I understand this through the eyes of a 20-year-old who has a few more years of experience. And then I found that when I got married or when I had kids or major life events, I'm like, that's the way that my dad felt about us. That's interesting. And I could put myself in his shoes a little bit more. So I was just curious if that was something that you had experienced with Ronnie and his passing.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more there.
I'm really interested to hear about how did you do this? Because that had to have been, as you mentioned, such a shock to your system, completely devastating to lose somebody so close to you, especially in that way that is so difficult to understand. How did you do this? Like, how did you take that and do something so powerful with it? Because it would be easy to just collapse under the weight of something like that happening to you. How did you possibly start this up and get this into the movement that it is today?
Good question. And you're right, it is easy to completely fall apart. And for a brief time I did, but right when he passed, I was able to jump in and help his new widow. And they had a very sassy son who at the time was about ready to have his very first birthday. And so at first it was, damage control of, having to hop in and sort of fix things and arrange funerals and, all the logistical stuff. And once that passed, I did fall apart. I was completely devastated. And I will never forget having this moment of looking in my bathroom mirror and truly not recognizing the person staring back at me. And I looked at my husband and I said, I don't understand how this became my life.
Yeah.
I was, just completely broken at that time. But then, well, one thing I found is that community equals immunity. So I was very blessed to have a very strong faith that I leaned on, very, very strong, that was a cornerstone that kept me hanging on, even if it was with white knuckles. And I had very supportive friends and my amazing husband, Nathan, who, were there not only for encouragement and there for the times where, I'd be up all night crying, but they're for the really messy stuff, April. What I mean by that, one of my favorite stories of the students that I work with is one that I tell them about how Nate, my husband, had to nuzzle up next to me on the couch one day a few weeks after Eddie died, and he put my little face in his hands and said, "Honey, I love you and I know you're heartbroken, but it's really time for you to start showering again." Like, girl, you gotta get together a little bit, And so I had people even like that, like, okay, you really gotta get it together. And as time went on a little bit, it was almost that anger that took over, that if this can happen to me, it's happening to hundreds of people every day, and it's not okay. So I just really started putting that pain into a purpose, started a blog, and just organically people started reaching out and saying, "Hey, would you speak to our school? Would you come to our church and speak to our congregation?" And it really snowballed from there, and I made it into a World Without Suicide organization. And I've just been able to partner with people that genuinely want to provide effective mental health support, either, to their students, to their employees, to their entire counties. And they're looking to crush that stigma and really get a movement started. And so it has been one of the biggest blessings of my life to be able to do this.
Oh, that's an amazing story. It's an amazing act of courage, and something, if the people listening to this, if you listen to a lot of my episodes, you know exactly where I'm going to go right now. You know exactly what I'm going to say right now. There's a concept that I harp on like crazy on this podcast, and it's this notion of taking radical responsibility for your life. And that means taking 100% responsibility for 100% of the situations you find yourself in. And this is a beautiful example of that, because sometimes when people hear the word responsible, they think at fault or to blame, and that is not it. Or they caused their situation. That's not it. It's not about cause, fault, blame, because you did not cause any of this. You're not at fault for any of it. You're not to blame for any of it. However, you do find yourself in this situation now, and here you are. You have the opportunity to take responsibility for what you do next, not what other people do or the circumstances that led up to it. That you can't control. But what you can do is decide, and it's a hard decision, and this is not easy to do. Don't think that I'm going to say this and I'm making light of how much work that actually is. It's incredibly difficult. But you can decide in that moment, I'm going to take responsibility for how I move forward. And that's exactly what you did. You decided to, I love the way you said that, to turn your pain into a purpose that can help other people instead of staying on the couch and not showering anymore.
You're so right. You're so right. And I love that concept of radical responsibility. And it was also a me taking responsibility and promising that I would never be next. Because that easily could have been me, particularly with how, devastated I was. But that option is completely off the table. I am completely responsible for being healthy and making sure that it never happens to me, but that it hopefully will never happen for the families and communities and organizations that I work with as well.
Such a big deal. Such a big deal. I want to turn a little bit of a corner and talk about stigma, because, you're talking about keeping yourself healthy. I have definitely been in situations, 3 in particular, where I absolutely ran to see a mental health professional. One of them was after my first daughter was born. I had very severe postpartum depression and anxiety and PTSD and all this crazy stuff that happens after you have a baby. But there were other times in my life as well. And as somebody who sought help from a mental health professional, I can't tell you how powerful that is, how helpful that experience was. Yet there is a huge stigma around it. And I'm curious, as somebody who's done work in this area, do you have a feel for where that comes from, or why? Because we hear people talk about it a lot, yet it still exists. Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's a great question, and I agree with you. The power of speaking up and getting the help that you need has saved more lives than we can count. I think the stigma I don't think it's a coincidence that 7 out of the 10 suicide deaths in 2016 were completed by men. That to me is not a coincidence. I think one of the stigmas that we need to get over, particularly with males, even though we feel it as well, is that asking for help is weak. That we need to be tough, pick ourselves up by the bootstraps, or quote, man up, end quote. I think it's the perceived weakness of actually empowering our voice and admitting that we need support. So I think that's a part of it. And that's one of the main fears and stigmas that I hear most often in the groups that I work with. But the other stigma that I find, which is interesting, particularly in the work that I do with the military and at the Department of Defense level or the national security level, is that if I admit that I need help, I will no longer be trusted. I won't be trusted to do my job, to know this information, etc. And the way I look at it as, if you are unsafe and you're not mentally healthy, then you need to get that support and get back to a mind frame where you can serve others and do your job. But you can't do that effectively until you get the support that you need. But I think that stigma is really strong, that people think that they'll lose too much if they admit that they need help.
That's really an interesting insight. I hadn't thought about it that way. Especially, you're right, with that group of people where the duties of their job are as they are. I mean, you need to have a really strong, I don't even know what to call it, strong psychological capability. I mean, you're dealing with a lot of really technical and heavy and difficult and nuanced stuff, and that just requires your mind to be in the right place. You have a really unique lens into this. So many, there have been a number of high profile deaths by suicide in the last few years. You can name Robin Williams, Anthony Bourdain, all like people like that who, obviously, those of us who saw them in the media, we weren't close friends and family members of them. But even as you're describing it, close friends and family members of people who have ended their lives by suicide, you're surprised. I mean, completely shocked that this happened, because it's difficult to recognize when someone might be struggling. What are some of the misconceptions that people have that they might not even realize about suicide itself and what might be happening with that person who's contemplating?
Great question. And you're right. I think one of the biggest misconceptions in what really comes to light after a celebrity dies by suicide, or somebody that is very affluent and seems to have everything, there's a misconception that, only those type of people die by suicide. So the ones that are, quote, seem crazy or disturbed, or that are struggling financially. Where the truth is, suicidal thought and action and mental illness, it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care how much you have in your bank account, how many, feature films you've been in. It can touch any type of person. So I think that's one of the main misconceptions that we have, or that we think that someone would be very outwardly acting differently if they were suicidal. And there's definitely warning signs in most individuals, but it's not like they wear a big sign that says, help me, I'm at risk for ending my life. So I think that's one major misconception. The other, the misconception of that suicide is a selfish thing to do. That's one that I hear a lot.
Oh, yeah. You hear that all the time.
All the time. And I was guilty of that. After Eddie died, I thought, oh my gosh, how could you do this to our family a second time? How could you leave this baby? And I was angry, and I thought it was selfish. But then once I really started digging into the suicidal mind and learning all that I have in this journey, when someone is suicidal, often they have the mindset of truly believing with every fiber of their being that they are a burden, that their family, that anybody that knows them would be truly better off if they were no longer here. And that in that circumstance, even though we have a healthy mindset and we disagree, they can see through their depressed lens that, in fact, they're doing us a favor and giving us a gift by no longer burdening us. So in that fact, they're not thinking of it as a selfish thing at all, but they're looking at it as a gift that they can give us. And that's often something that I think is missed or not thought of. And of course, in our healthy mindset, we're thinking, oh my gosh, no, we love you. We want you to be here. There's so much joy and things that you will miss out on. But they don't see that through the scope of their pain of just wanting to end that and support us by not being here, if that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the way that you say it, it absolutely does. And you're right. You hear that all the time. But when you describe it that way, it almost flips it 180. That person's doing what they think is a very compassionate, selfless thing. Wow, that's really powerful. It actually reminds me of, I did an episode with a woman named Shala Nicely. She was episode 60 for folks who didn't catch her episode. She focuses on obsessive compulsive disorder, which is another form of mental illness that is very misunderstood. And there are a lot of misconceptions about it. And so much of this is echoing that, where things are not at all the way that, those of us who are not informed, which I would consider myself one of those people. I don't know as much about suicide as I should. Those of us who are not informed, you might think you know what's happening with that person, but you really don't. I mean, it's so easy. It's so easy to get it wrong. And in this case, the repercussions of not having the right information, they're so heavy and they're so big.
It is. It really is. And you're right. And by not being informed or by keeping this topic silent, because it does make people uncomfortable, that those secrets in keeping this silent, it keeps us sick. And too often, April, as we've seen, it ends in suicide. So that's why we need to be informed. We need to have this conversation and offer practical coping skills for individuals, not only at the youth level, but in every organization, in every family, etc., because it is preventable, but we all need to start this conversation.
So let's go there. That's actually a really great segue. Let's go in that direction of the work that you do. How do you help folks? What are some of the messages that you're trying to get out there, either through some of the keynote work that you're doing, or I don't know if you're doing workshops or other things like that. What are some of the key messages that you want people to know, that you try to get out there in some of the work that you're doing?
Sure. So at the youth level, when I work with schools, particularly when I work with youth, I'm finding that they're lacking coping skills. But we can say that about adults, right? I mean, there was no class in school, or often in our families, we didn't learn healthy coping and how to reframe situations, to know that it's not the end of the world. So when I work with youth, I'll do, my motivational keynote, but I give very practical coping skills that they can use to deal with the very strong reality that many of these students are in, whether it's bullying, whether it's abuse at home, what that looks like to better support themselves and to empower their voice if they're silently struggling to say, my life matters, I need help, and it's okay to say that. So that's on that end of things, because I think if we can arm youth with true practical coping skills, that they'll be better able to handle situations and hopefully not feel like suicide is their only option. So that's the goal there. And I also work with educators to give strategies to support students who struggle with mental health issues in the classroom, whether it be anxiety, depression, self-harm tendencies, etc. Then at the corporate level, I work with corporations, giving them very easy to follow practical solutions to create supportive, stigma-free work environments that support the mental health and safety of every employee. So that's everything from communication styles that managers have, how to better interact and speak to employees to support their mental health, to know what warning signs to look out for, and how to respond if an employee is in crisis. Because unfortunately, I've had, honestly, April, just this week, 2 calls from major corporations who had an employee attempt suicide on site at work.
Wow.
And it happens way more than you think.
Wow.
The Wall Street Journal just this year had a really great article that broke open this topic of suicide at work and how it's been increasing over the past several years. And so just to be able to have those standard operating procedures in place of what to do if that happens, because I find often there's no procedures in place. The managers aren't trained to know how to handle that situation, and that can turn bad very quickly and put the safety of others in place as well. So it's important for all of us to think about and be prepared for. And I know it's unimaginable. And I wish I could go in and the work that I do, there is so much joy and we do have fun and there is a lot of light in it, when we're looking at leadership skills and communication skills. But then we also have to talk about the hard things. And we need to prepare for them just in case, and hopefully lead in a way where we can prevent that from ever happening.
Amazing. That is such important work. And again, for folks who have listened to me for a while, what's resonating here and where I keep going back to, and it's a topic that's always in the back of my mind, frankly, but it's very loud right now, is, Mettie, you said something earlier about how, your life matters. And it's so true. I think about on multiple times a day, not like more than a daily basis, how much of a gift, and this sounds so cheesy, and I don't know how to convey to people like how much I mean this, how much of a gift each of our lives is, and how important time is. And I've said it a million times, but time is the most non-renewable resource on the planet. You're never going to get more of it. And one of the biggest goals that I have for both this podcast and the work that I'm doing on my website is to help people make the most of that time that they have, to help people live the most vibrant, bold, aligned life that they possibly can, because you only get one shot at it. And the work that you're doing is so critical because you've got people at the point where they are contemplating, cutting that time short. And that it weighs on me so much to think how important your work is in giving people that opportunity to live the rest of their life, giving that back to them. Like how critically important that is to them and to everyone around them who loves them and wants to spend their time with them. They do, the same ways that you felt about your brothers. It's just such important work.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you saying that so much. And you're right. Just to think of, you mentioned the celebrity suicides and how talented they are. Mm-hmm. Or when I get brought into a school after a youth dies by suicide, and I just can't get past the fact of their gifts and their talent and the light that they were meant to shine in the world now is no more. And I think it's one of the biggest injustices, especially when it's preventable. It should be a strong motivating factor for all of us to blow the lid off of this topic and address it with our families and friends and organizations, because it is that important, as you mentioned.
Right. I'm curious about, as you look back on the journey that you had in setting up this organization and doing the work that you're doing, was there ever a point where I don't know how to quite say it, where you experienced a setback? Or I could imagine, just as you're doing this, your own personal connection could bubble to the surface and make it difficult sometimes to keep going because you have such a close connection to this cause that is not an easy one to come to terms with. Did you ever experience that adversity or experience a setback in that way, or get afraid of moving on with what you were doing? Did you ever experience anything like that as you were setting up your organization and getting it going?
Oh my gosh, only about 1 million moments of that.
Thank you for your honesty.
So yes, absolutely. I could give you many examples of that. And I think a big misconception, and it always makes me laugh when, someone will come up to me after a keynote and they say, oh man, if I could just be as fearless as you to, stand up in front of thousands of people and share my truth, that would be my life stream. And I just say, whoa, back up. Definitely fearless does not describe me. But I made peace with, when I started this, that I would do this and there would be times when I would be afraid. So I made peace with it. I made friends with it. And I made sure that I wouldn't be paralyzed by it. So I use fear and adversity as an indicator in my life. So if something comes up and it's a struggle, or, I'm feeling a lot of fear about, a major opportunity or whatever it may be, I use it as an indicator to check in and to see if I'm about to do something very brave. Because most often that's when something difficult comes up. And you're right, when you're something this personal, it is tough because, things will, even though it's been several years now since Eddie passed, in some ways it's still very, very fresh. So a perfect example of this, and so this is very raw and real for me to share this, but because it just happened this week, I have a major event at the end of the month. And, I'm getting ready. It's an intensive training. And then a keynote the next day. And a participant, attendee reached out to me, and as the title of the email, it was about the conference. And I open up the message thinking it's going to be a question, about the strategies and in our day, intensive training, working together. And instead of that, it's a picture of Eddie and this man I don't know, and then other friends that Ed and I have in common. And I was just so taken aback by it. Yeah. And at first, it took my breath away, and then I just cried because I just wasn't expecting that to come up when I was, on mission orientated, well caffeined, going through my to-do list for the day, and it pops up of, it's still always right there, and it's something that I need to deal with. But it's great that I can channel it back to the mission, but still with fully feeling everything that's happening and dealing with that head on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mentioned, losing my dad when I was younger, and again, very different circumstances, but I can empathize with things coming out of nowhere sometimes. Grief it's sneaky sometimes. It is a sneaky bugger, and it never ever leaves us. That is for sure. I want to, as we're winding down, I want to take just a minute and have you speak directly to two groups of people. The first group of people is, I'm wondering if you have advice for people who have gone through something difficult. It might be a suicide of a friend or family member. Maybe it's something else. Maybe they've lost a child. Maybe they've gone through an illness. Whatever it is. You have such perspective on, moving on and rebuilding yourself and reinventing yourself from there. I'm wondering if you can speak directly to people listening who might find themselves in that situation. If there's any advice that you have for them about how they might take their next steps.
With somebody that's struggling in any of the ways that you mentioned, what I say and truly believe is that if your heart is beating, you are alive for a reason. And it's hard, and life is messy, and we lose people we love, and we get illnesses. But if your heart is beating, hang in there, even if it's with white knuckles. Hang in there, because your voice matters, your life matters, and you're put here for a reason. You just need to hang on long enough until you find out what that reason is. And then once you find that path, or you're given a glimpse into what that looks like, one of my very favorite quotes is by Brene Brown. And she says, "Daring leaders who live into their values are never silent about the hard things." And what I tell people who are struggling or who are nervous to speak up, or even nervous to take a chance, I've said this before, secrets keep us sick. Silence keeps us stuck at where we're at. So speak up and share your truth, whether that's saying, "I am drowning and I need help," or "I'm not happy and I need to make a change." Whatever that may be, speak up, because your life or someone else's life may depend on it.
I think you actually just hit both of them. I was going to ask you to speak directly to somebody who might be thinking about suicide and might be feeling the way that you described before, that maybe they're a burden. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add now with that lens on it, but that was beautiful. I mean, that was so poignant.
My advice would be the same, but one thing I would say for someone that is having those thoughts is that just because you think it doesn't make it true. So if you're in that mindset, don't believe those lies that your mind is telling you. Speak to someone who has insight that can give you honest feedback to let you know what's true and to reiterate the things that I just said, because you need that perspective, and you need to find that, like I said, community equals immunity. There's hope available, there's support available, and to hang on, because your life matters and that voice matters. And as you so beautifully put, April, your gifts are needed here on earth, so don't do anything to cut that time short.
I am so impressed with everything that you have done after experiencing what you have, and the impact that you're making on the world is so incredibly inspiring. I'm just so incredibly impressed with you and what you're doing.
Thank you. That's so kind. And this has just been such a pleasure being here today. And I'm a big fan of your podcast and all the women that are just on here pioneering such groundbreaking movements. So it's just an honor to be featured and have my voice shared alongside of you guys. And one thing that I want to do, because I know we touched on a lot today, is send you some information about warning signs to look out for in people that you're with, as well as support resources, who you can call, who you can text if they are having those thoughts or struggling themselves.
Yes, and I will put those, I'll make those downloadable from your show notes page. So anyone listening to this, you can head over to Mettie's show notes page. There is a link in her episode description that'll take you right there. And you can download those materials straight from her show notes page. Before we close out today, if anyone is interested in getting to know you a little bit more, learning more about your work, where can we find you online?
You can visit MettieSpiess.com, MEttie.Spiess.com, or you can email me directly at Mettie@aworldwithoutsuicide.com.
Wonderful. Before I let you go today, I have to ask you for one last thing, which is the question that I ask every single person who I interview for the podcast, and that is for your favorite motivational song to add to our Spotify playlist.
Oh, I love that. I love the song Fight Song by Rachel Platten.
Yes, I love
that's
that
just
song.
Isn't that so great, just to get you pumped up and ready for the battle of what life brings? So that would be mine.
I'm going to try not to cry when I say this, but that song I'm not going to succeed. This is not going to go well. That song has such a special place in my heart because the morning my husband and I, back before we had kids, we had been trying to get pregnant with my first daughter. And the morning, for some reason, I woke up and that song was in my head. I'm going to cry. And the lyric that was in my head was, at the beginning of the song, she says, "A single word can make a heart open." And I took a pregnancy test that morning, and I remember flipping that pregnancy test over, and it said pregnant. And I felt like my heart exploded at that moment. And every single time I hear that song, I turn into this like ugly crying person that I am right now because it is such a special song. So I'm really, really excited that you brought that one up. That's such a good contribution.
Oh, thank you for your vulnerability and sharing that. I am totally a crier. I don't understand when people are like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm crying." It's like, no, let it out, sister. Don't be sorry. I love it. I embrace that. Rock that out. That was awesome. And it was a perfect way to end this episode.
I love it. I love it. Well, I can't thank you enough for being here, for your vulnerability and for your openness to sharing so much about your story and the experiences that your family has gone through. And oh my gosh, your work is so incredibly important. So I'm just thrilled to be one more voice helping to project it out into the world because it's very, very impactful. So thank you so much.
Thank you, April.
I hope you guys got as much out of that conversation with Mettie Spiess as I did. I feel like my eyes and my heart have been opened to a topic that is so incredibly important because of the amazing, passionate, clear, compassionate way that Mettie speaks about such a difficult but important topic. This is such powerful work, and I'm so glad that we were able to share that vision and share that information in this episode. Now, I want to recap just a few things from this episode. Number one, you know what I'm going to say. You know where I'm going to go. It's the notion of radical responsibility. Mettie's situation is the exact embodiment of what I talk about all the time. Radical responsibility, meaning You are not at fault. You are not to blame. You didn't necessarily cause the situation that you're in, but you're here now. And you get to decide. It's a decision. It's not something that just happens to you. You have to make an intentional decision to take responsibility for what you are going to do, think, feel from this point forward. I don't care what situation you're in. 100%, this is not a roundup situation. This is 100% of the situations you're in, you can take 100% responsibility for what you do next. I want that to feel empowering to you. That should give you the license to move forward and take control however you can. Mettie's example of creating this beautiful, powerful movement as a result of losing two of her amazing brothers. It's such a perfect example of that. She was not at fault, was not to blame, did not cause the situation she was in, and it would have been so easy to sit and let it swallow her up. You know, we kind of giggled about it, for her to sit on her couch and continue to not shower. But she didn't. She moved on from what is one of the most difficult situations I can possibly imagine. There are many that fit in that category, but one of the most difficult. She moved on from it, and she created something beautiful and powerful as a result of it. So whatever situation you are in right now, I don't care if it's that you're facing your own incredible adversity. I don't care if it's that you're sitting at your office right now looking at the walls of your cubicle thinking, are you kidding me? This is it? I don't care if you are sitting in absolute fear. We're going to talk about that in just a second. In absolute fear of taking your next steps, whatever those might be. You get to decide. You get to take responsibility for that. Do it. Take it. You have more control than you think you do. I say it all the time. This is a beautiful example of that. All right, I'm going to hit on this notion of fear. Mettie talked about how she made friends with her fear when she was setting up this organization, that she was terrified millions of times along the way, and she kept going. She just acknowledged that the fear was going to be there. She's not a fearless person. She just acknowledged that it was going to be there, said, all right, friend, come right along with me because we're going to keep going. Fear is one of those things that stops us in our tracks, and it keeps us from doing the things that we are here to do. Mettie talked about it. If your heart is beating, you are here for a reason. And those reasons, just being afraid, can keep us from living out those reasons. And that is such a shame and a tragedy. Whatever you need to do to move past that fear, do it. I recently did an episode purely on 3 ways that you can move past your fear and move forward anyway. I'm going to highlight one of the reasons from that episode, and I'm going to give you something new, sort of a 4th reason. So one of the things I said in that episode was this notion of the pause button. Our reptilian sort of old brain it evolved in a time when the world was a mortally scary place. So at every turn, there were things that we encountered in our environment, whether it be animals or other tribes of people or whatever it is, who could end our lives. And our brains evolved to be constantly scanning for negativity, constantly scanning for threat. It does that innately. It does that automatically. And that's why fear is a primary emotion that we feel. When we're going to move out of our comfort zone, immediately we feel fear, and that is the primary emotion. But there's always at least one, typically many, secondary emotions, and that's where the positive stuff hides. And you have to work to pay attention to it. So if you can hit, I call it the pause button, because I'm not telling you that the fear is not going to be there. Mettie's right. It is. You just have to acknowledge it. Yep, I'm afraid. And hey, I'm afraid, and I probably should be, because that means I'm taking this seriously. Great. But let's just hit pause for just one moment on that fear. What's the next emotion that you feel? It might be excitement. It might be energy. It might be passion. It might be happiness. It could be any number or all of those. Any number of positive things are just on the other side of fear, operating as secondary emotions. They're secondary because that is not something our old reptile brain was evolved to seek out and find, but they're there. So if you can hit the pause button on that primary emotion, you can actually start to experience those secondary emotions and let them start to operate and let them motivate you. Now, I'm going to take this second to pontificate for another moment. One of the big criticisms of the field of positive psychology is people who don't understand what the field actually is doing. They say, oh, that's just people who are pretending to be happy all the time. That's just people who are ignoring the negative things that happen and faking a smile and putting rose-colored glasses on and moving forward and pretending to be happy. And that's not realistic. And those people are wrong. That is not what positive psychology is trying to do. Rather, positive psychology is trying to create balance in our minds. And this is an important concept. Again, fear, threat, and negative emotions are primary emotions because that's how our brain is hardwired. It has been millennia since our brain has been hardwired to do that. We have tons of practice as a species to have our brain immediately go negative. We don't need help in that arena. We don't need help to teach our brain how to feel bad. It does that on its own. What we do need to do intentionally, though, is balance that scale, to give a little bit more weight to those positive emotions, not because we're ignoring the negative ones that happen, but because we're trying to balance it out and actually give an accurate picture of reality. If you let your brain do its thing, the only picture of reality you're going to see is negative, and that is not accurate. So it is not the case that positive psychology is trying to, tip the scales to the positive and make you see this fake positive reality that's out there. No, it's making you see reality for what it is. It is never 100% negative. There is something out there. Maybe it is more negative than positive, but there's something out there that you can focus on to help balance the scales. So that's what I'm talking about here. I just talked a lot about the pause button, but it's a really powerful technique. The second one that I want to talk about is the second technique for getting over fear that I want to talk about is to speak to yourself the way that you would speak to a child who's afraid. So many times the advice we get is to power through and think like Red Bull commercial right now, right? Like power through and just keep going and push hard and whatever that happens to be. That's not the approach that I like to take a lot of the time. Instead, I love the way that Mettie said it. Make friends with your fear. Be kind to it. Think about the way that you would talk to a small child who's afraid and talk to yourself that way. So when my daughter's afraid of something, I get down on her level. I look her in the eye and I'm like, honey, I know your fear feelings are valid. They absolutely are. This is scary, but think about what you're going to get out of it. You absolutely can do this. Listen to the tone of my voice right now. This is how I want you talking to yourself when you're afraid. Be kind. Be kind to yourself. Be compassionate with yourself. Be your best friend. How would they talk to you if you were afraid? Talk to yourself that way. Again, it's a way of acknowledging those fears, but then moving past them and giving yourself the space to move past them while not, ignoring the fact that you have a realistic feeling there and it is actually occurring and that's okay. But you're also tougher than that. And you can move forward. So I hope those couple of things help. If you want more tips, like I said, there's a recent episode that I did that's purely about 3 tips for moving past fear. You can check that episode out as well. Now, the last thing that I want to hit is on the notion of mental illness. And Mettie was correct here too. Mental illness does not discriminate. So many people suffer from a myriad of mental illnesses anywhere along the spectrum that might hit clinical levels, maybe not, whatever. We all struggle with feelings of depression sometimes, feelings of anxiety sometimes, and a myriad of other things. I love the way that Mettie put it. Your life matters. You matter. Your voice matters. Your brain will lie to you sometimes, and you do not have to believe everything you think. You can question those thoughts. And questioning those thoughts in a systematic way is exactly what a mental health professional will help you do. The example that I give to people, that the way that I thought about it when I was seeking help for, the few times in my life that I've gone to see a counselor, is that I imagine a really big pantry full of, cereal boxes and cans of food and all this stuff, right? All this stuff crammed into a pantry, and an earthquake hits and all the stuff falls off the shelves. And you walk into your pantry and you're thinking, oh my God, there is stuff everywhere. I don't even know where to begin to try to clean this up. I can't do it. I don't even know where to start. What your therapist is going to do is they're going to pick up a box of cereal and they're going to say, don't worry about the rest of that stuff. Where does this go? Where does this box go? And you point at the shelf and you say, that box goes over there. And then they pick up another box of cereal and they say, hey, this kind of looks like that. Does this go next to that? And you're like, yeah, it goes on that shelf over there. Awesome. And they help you put the pieces back together. They're a neutral third party that helps you sift through big things in a systematic way when you're not able to do that for yourself. Pure and simple. That's what they are. Don't be afraid to seek help and go talk to a therapist and be honest with them. The things that have come out of my face in therapy sessions, sometimes when I think about those sentences, it is cringeworthy. Oh my God, I can't believe that I've said that out loud to another human being. Be honest with them. You can't shock these people. They've heard everything. So go in there and air your business. All of it. The dirtiest of your laundry. Air it. You can't freak them out, and they absolutely know exactly what to do to help you. So please, please, please seek help. Now, I would be missing an opportunity if I didn't take this moment to also give you one resource. I'm going to put a bunch of resources on Mettie's show notes page, as I mentioned, but I want to make sure that I give you one here, and that is the number to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. If you or anyone you know are contemplating suicide, you think they might be contemplating suicide, whatever it is, you owe it to that life. You owe it to them to call. Just make one phone call. The number is 1-800-273-8255. That's 1-800-273-8255. Please call. Your life matters, you matter, and your voice matters. Thank you so much for listening this week. Before we close out today, I want to say thank you to my producer, Cameron Hill, and to my incredible sponsor, Modern Well. If you want to learn more about how you can reach your goals in a one-of-a-kind work-life community, visit www.modernwell.co. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who might benefit from this inspiring message. And if you have a moment, click the link in the episode description to leave me a rating and a review on iTunes. It would mean so much to me. Finally, I want to remind you that it is absolutely possible to live a happy, fulfilling life, even in spite of all of the chaos and demands we all experience. Sign up at aprilseifert.com to gain access to tools that will help you do just that. I have carefully created and curated a set of tools that combine the powerful fields of psychology and design thinking to help you intentionally create a fulfilling, happy life you love. Thank you so much for joining me this week, and until next week, stay inspired.